All right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do eye movement research, and because Kirill particularly asked about gaze contingency, I'll also tell you a little bit about that. We had one or two projects, a couple of projects that has eye movement as an input modality. I have been doing eye movement research for a long time, and this part I'll skip because this is exactly what Kirill said about my current role, self-introduction. And then I have this slide about all the different projects I've been doing. Before I moved to my current school, I was at the University of Zurich Geography. So I've done a lot of research that is to do with geovisualization. That's how I also know Standa. And we share some interests there, I would say, about map use and cognition and perception. And I studied things, very nitty-gritty stuff about visualization, you know, how to use shadows to do 3D, what kind of illusions it might generate, whether color is discriminable, what is the thresholds for it, how to do realism, visual complexity assessment, interfaces for geovisualization elements other than the maps themselves, and 3D, and this is also virtual reality. And this one is the Gaze Contingent project. It was a funded project. I'll show you a little bit the outcomes from that. And since I moved to FHNW, I do a lot of extended reality projects as well. That kind of is a combination of this last two, or maybe these two. So there's a lot of things about spatial decision making, something about using augmented reality and eye tracking for cognitive health. This is not gaze contingent. This is actually inferring things from the data itself, or turning images to 3D visualizations and then trying to understand the visual quality or perceptual quality or perceptual thresholds about high or low quality, where eye movement, I have one example of that for trying to understand what people see, and you know, in the peripheral vision they don't see as much, and so on and so forth. Just wanted to leave that in case, you know, others work in these areas and something resonates with you, you can also contact me. So typical routine, the way that I use eye tracking is actually less interaction, more attention and cognition analysis. Typically, we start with data, and then the data turns into a visualization, and the visualization gets studied, whether it works, where people look, where they don't look, what information they notice and what they don't notice, and which sequence they study the display. You know, you got eye movement people, you know how it works. So usually that then becomes data again, because eye movement software tends to, or eye movement recordings tend to produce big data. And then you can visualize the eye movements and have the entire circle all over again. So we have, this is, while this is typical, an example of this, and Standa might recognize this because I use this in my talk since 2009, sorry, the map is from 2000. So like things like, you know, this is individual differences. This is one person solving one task using one map. You have 11 seconds and 25 fixations, and you have the correct answer. Same task, a different person. The difference is strikingly high. So from 11 seconds, you go to 521 seconds, and from 25 fixations, you go to 1,000 something fixations. I use this example to demonstrate that, also tell my students that this could be you, and this could be perhaps one of your clients. And so this kind of information that the eye movement reveals, also like it tells something about usability and differences on information processing between people. So we use this quite a bit for feeding the information back to design and design of technologies as well. So I will just go through a little bit quicker because I want to get to the gaze contingency. But of course, we use typical density maps, and I've done some work on sequence analysis, and I think Standa actually detected a bug in this analysis, and I should reanalyze it, but I never managed so far. But there's some like efforts in, this is interesting when you say, okay, here's high performers, here's low performers, and you group them. This is grouped by speed, so people who completed the tasks fast and people who are really slow. And then you see how they might have studied, in which order they may have studied the elements on the interface, if they did search first or filter first, or if they looked at the map and the legend or so. So we do this like a sort of a soup of different methods into trying to analyze eye movements. We also look at the pupil variations. This is something that I haven't done a lot, but I'm aware of it because it's a difficult problem with the people, because people respond to both environmental light. So if your visualization is a bit lighter or darker or whatever people are looking at, or if the room is a little bit lighter or darker, it might change. But it also responds to cognitive changes, medication, sleep. So there's a lot of information that you can get from it. But you need to correct for some of these perceptual responses if you are trying to identify, let's say, task difficulty and things like that. But I do have some like aging projects, and for me, it's interesting to try to get information from the people, variation that is as a sort of a sign of cognitive disorders or cognitive difficulties that people experience. In these examples, this is visualization focused. We have had a mono condition and a stereo condition, so people view the same thing in monoscopic and stereoscopic displays, and we can see that pupil diameter changes. So the stereo leads to larger pupil size. What does that mean is open to interpretation. Depends also on how you did it. And what is also sort of interesting, but apparently known, is that left eye and the right eye tends to differ. So the pupil sizes are not equal between the two eyes. So we are still looking into it. I found some papers apparently that does exist, but does it mean something cognitively? I don't know yet. So we also more recently explored if we can visualize gaze for collaboration, especially in extended reality, but I think it could, I also know publications that look at gaze for collaboration in coding, for example, if people are doing peer coding or if they are in a sort of a group contributions or something, it apparently helps. In this case, we are exploring, this project is still active. If we can visualize where somebody is looking, and the scenario here is an architectural decision making. If somebody is looking at proposed buildings, which City of Zurich is a partner as well, and there's a jury, they usually study multiple buildings and they try to say, okay, this is the one that wins, and architects, submit multiple ones. And then we try to, like, if we show the gaze, do we show it as a sort of a donut, a continuous one? Do we show it as a small dot, or like visualizing the gaze, or do we show it as a continuous line that actually comes from the eyes, and so on? So we are trying to understand if gaze visualization helps, and if designing this gaze visualization in a particular way helps more. And then we also had these annotations of digital twins, which I thought was super interesting. And I think if you visualize, if you have good hand tracking and eye tracking, if we visualize what, for example, an expert is doing to the digital twin of the object in an office, and then you have, let's say, a repair person in the field, they can see what the experts are touching and looking. That actually, in this study, we had some visual annotations that were synchronized, and you could see that the number of spatial words people need to use obviously drops. Like the tasks get faster because you don't have to keep trying to explain, what is near, what is behind, what is on your left, and what is my left, and whatnot. So this is actually a sort of an helpful paradigm as well. So this was maybe a video. If I can, I don't know why I don't, or maybe I don't have the video. It doesn't matter too much. So this is HoloLens 2. I thought I embedded the video, but I think this is just an image. So you can detect the gaze, the head position, but it actually, with HoloLens 2, you also have binocular eye tracking. So you can actually also visualize where somebody is looking. This is the architectural scenario where I actually wanted to show you the way that the person operates this, but I can maybe do it differently. And then, like, I wanted to, when you asked me to give you the gaze talk, I thought that what kind of gaze, like what kind of eye tracking stuff I did, which ones are actually gaze contingent. So I have now highlighted a couple of them, but I have done also like things like a deep learning saliency model with someone where we have eye movement data as an input, which helps saying that this is actually where people's attentions go in free viewing. And here's a sort of a saliency model. So you use eye tracking data for validating that. And then we did a sort of a very short paper, which we want to expand, but it's taking forever, about like conducting eye tracking studies online using webcams and smartphones. With machine learning now, there's a lot of promising developments. We looked at age differences in route learning. We looked at comparing hands and eyes, so gaze and mouse interactions. We examined a little bit of some global or focal attention, so how much the attention is distributed over a particular area. Is it like really constrained in a smaller area, or is it all over the place? This can be also quite interesting as an indicator of whether there are too many distractors. We studied colors with algebra in multiple papers. We studied some bike maps, and we did gaze and feet as an additional input modality when you are interacting with geospatial. So here you have gaze basically can give a command for like zooming in, and feet can do something like panning, so you can do something else with your hands. So that was kind of a multimodal interaction idea, and so on and so forth. We have like a number of stuff that are to do with methods, and that are to do with actually using eye movements to understand this or that, or visualizing eye movement data. So we get obsessed a lot about eye movements. Now, gaze-contingent displays. Does everybody know what these are? I'm looking, when I'm looking this way, I'm looking at you. Let me bring you here so you can. So gaze-contingent displays, basically when you have an adaptive display that knows where you're looking and renders the display differently. So it started for me for a level of detail management for 3D graphics with my PhD. So that was, as you see, the early publications are quite a while ago. And there's this concept called foveation. Does anybody know? Does everybody know what that is? Not necessarily. So in the human eye, so that's the graphic that you're seeing here, at the back of the retina, there's a yellow spot, and that's called fovea. And that yellow spot is very, very important spot. So when the light goes into the eye, that's actually what connects to the brain. It captures a lot of the light. And this light is captured by two kinds of receptors. One is called cones and the other is called rods. And the cones are very sensitive to color and contrast, and rods are more sensitive to motion. Now, what you see here is in the center of the fovea, you see this little spike. That is the number of cones. So in the center, you can see a lot of detail, but it very quickly and very sharply drops in the peripheral vision. So if you put your hands on the sides, you barely know that you have hands, but if I ask you what color is that, you may or may not be able to tell me. And this is very interesting. So the color resolution drops, the contrast is dropping, the level of detail is dropping. Human eye does not see the world in uniform resolution. So if human eye doesn't see the world in uniform resolution, you could potentially also create a gaze-contingent display and show the levels of detail matching to how the human eye behaves. So this is the model of the vision. You have a lot of rods in the peripheral vision, which are good for night vision and which are good for catching motion. And this is true for all creatures. So peripheral vision is very good for catching motion. And this is something that you can also see, like predators will have their eyes in front and the prey will have it on the side. And by having it on the side, you have a larger field of view. That means you can detect motion better. So they are programmed to notice the motion coming at them and run away. And the stereoscopic vision allows you to actually see how close you are to the object. So you are like a hunter who needs to actually like know exactly when to attack. So you can see this in prey-predator models, but this is humans. Humans are predators, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know how to be with. So this has been this foveation idea that humans don't see that much in their peripheral vision in terms of color and detail. This has been adopted in video rendering in the past. And single images or video frames. But in my PhD, I tried to take it to the stereoscopic vision, the combined visual acuity that comes from having two eyes and having this peripheral vision. So I started doing stuff like this. And this is basically a sort of a computer vision task. If it's standard procedures, you would create different levels of detail ahead of time, like these are like an image pyramid, and then you would say that, okay, if somebody's looking here, I can actually discard 72% of the data, and technically people may not see that differently. And if they look at the a little bit closer to the center, the gain should actually be a little bit less, because then you cannot discard as much information. At the periphery, obviously, you keep only so much information. So this is, I think, mono, and this is stereo. So this is the first column where you do monoscopic, and somebody's looking here, and you are basically discarding 72% of the image that you don't have to stream, which is an argument for doing this kind of level of detail management, because bandwidth, this kind of bandwidth control. So in terms of compression, you can also argue that it's a compression method, and some people do. But in terms of compression, there's a little bit of a, like, you do compress the image. The final image you have to transmit is actually small. But just pre-calculating all these image pyramids for every imaginable point is also computational cost. So computational cost-wise, it's not maybe the strongest argument, but streaming is quite a strong argument for this case. But what is interesting is if people notice this or not. If you see this, you know, this extremely pixelated scenes, you go like, yeah, this is probably useless, right? So, but let's see if it is. So after my PhD, I came to Switzerland, and Kenan did a PhD with me on basically continuation of the topic. So he first started with MATLAB, which quickly discovered wasn't the best idea, because MATLAB doesn't do very good memory management, or it wasn't at the time. But that was his first implementation, to try to see if you can fovate or gaze contingently display one layer of vector information on top of the raster information. You can see that, for example, where the person is looking, the streets are displayed, and where they are not looking, you also degrade the level of detail. So now he continued on to actually programming his own using OpenGL. So we start with a uniform image like this, and the geospatial image data sets can be really, really big. So it's a good argument to do something about them. So you can do gaze contingent contrast. So if somebody is looking in the middle, you can say, okay, I'll blur everything else, because people won't see these anyway. Technically, the argument is, if I'm staring at the cross section, I shouldn't even understand that if it is shown in the real size, I shouldn't even understand that anything was actually blurry on the periphery. And same thing, you can do it for color. These are vision models. You can say that, okay, I show the full color here, and I don't need to show much color. I can desaturate in the periphery. You can also do that with depth. So here's a hill, and we know this from a digital elevation model in this case, but you can also do it from stereoscopic vision if you have the right system. And you can say that, okay, these objects are actually further away from the person. If you are displaying in stereo, it will be anyway far, so you don't need to show them in the same level of resolution and color. Now, here's a little bit of a gaze contingent implementation. So we gave people tasks for visual search and some counting, which is kind of a more complex visual search. So now if you follow the gaze points, the red points, technically you shouldn't really realize what else is going on, but try to not watch that. Try to not watch the mouse, or try to not watch and look at the top of the image, you know, how dramatically the color and the resolution is changing. And this is like a huge amount of data being discarded per moment. Now, what we did, I will move on to the next slide. So we asked people a lot of questions, but one of the key questions was, did they notice that they were looking at a non-uniform display? Did you notice any visual artifacts? So you have a uniform display. They also work with displays or images that were regularly shown without any fovation or any gaze contingency, and a combination of these three. So the reason I say combo is based on contrast, color, and depth. You can combine them into a single application where everything is being degraded, which is what we have seen in the video. And then we had an adjusted combo, because after the pilot one, we changed the color contrast to see if people are better at different, let's say with the color, for example, you have a variable, right? You can say that the center should be only this big or this big, so you can decide a little bit what the visual models suggest. So in this case, what is interesting is that people do not, you can see that like average rating is around 2. So they notice some artifacts, but that is not different for uniform or combo. With adjusted combo, they noticed a bit more, but that's not statistically significant. Now, this question, the wording, of course, might be misunderstood in some ways or in others, because visual artifacts could mean different things to different people. But nonetheless, it's quite a strong response in the sense that we have seen that in 3 studies, that people do not actually notice the difference, like uniform and combo, the experience is quite identical. What we also have seen, which was a little bit of a surprise to me, was that actually people did a little better in terms of how fast they were when we gave them counting tasks. So in these aerial images, we told them, count the number of swimming pools or something, like for a number of tasks. So we had 3 different tasks. We varied the tasks. And the fact that they were, I think they were like 0.5 milliseconds faster. So over the course of like 100 images, let me actually see, I noted this one somewhere. So for every 100 images, they would basically be 1 minute faster. So if you think, okay, that may have been a mistake. Let's see. If you think about like someone who's doing search and rescue mission or something, and they have to view many, many images to see where the person is, you can say, okay, 1 minute could be a life-saving time gain. It's not applied, the argument is not so interesting, I think, but cognitive argument is interesting. Why should people be faster with a gaze-contingent display? And my main speculation about that is that it is possible that by doing what we did here, by removing a lot of the peripheral information, we are reducing overall entropy of the visualization. And, normally cognitively, the signals arrive from the environment to your eye, and you need to process them. The eye has its own filtering system, but here, the peripheral vision receives less information to filter. This is possible that we are detecting a little bit of an advantage because we are reducing visual complexity in the peripheral vision. It's very subtle, but I found it super interesting, and I want to study a bit more of that. So that was that one. And then I think I'm almost there. I will be on time. So this is something that we did recently. It's a little bit a silly stimulus, but I will show you. So this is something I mentioned earlier about how we wanted to see what the level of detail could be in the peripheral vision or not. So you don't quite, I mean, the video is not so super interesting, but what is happening when you see this flickering in the shoes is that somebody is looking here and they are supposed to rate the visual quality of the shoe. So we change the level of detail for these shoes, and we show them in pairs, and they are supposed to say, I'm looking at the same or different, same or different, same or different. And every time the level of detail between the 2 objects are actually the gap is getting larger. So there's a small gap, larger gap, larger gap. And we have been changing, how close they are to the central vision and slowly how it goes far. And the idea was to say, okay, as you go away from the center, you can actually degrade the level of detail of an object by a factor of X. And if you show it very high quality, also it might look the same at some point, like if you render it with very high quality, maybe let's say 4000K, and after 4K, and after 4K, maybe 5K looks the same to people, right? So the perceptual threshold. So this was kind of the study. We have done it in augmented reality. We also control the 3D distance to people. This is yet unpublished. This to come. And the reason we are featuring the shoes is we actually had an industry collaborator, and they wanted a sort of a fashion company wanted to do something with augmented reality. So that's why we have the shoes. We have different kinds of shoes in this project. All right, so I'm going to leave it here. I mean, for me, this is also a gaze contingency paradigm. This helps people to study what happens in the peripheral vision, because there we can restrict, like people can't accidentally look at the object. If they try to look at the object, it disappears, right? So it actually enables extreme control in what kind of information you are looking at that moment, and whether you have to judge the objects, whether they are different or the same, with what is called a covert attention, right? So if your eyes are fixed in the middle, but I'm asking you, like I'm looking straight at the camera and I'm asking, are my two hands the same or different? Now what I have to use is my covert attention. If I overtly try to look, the objects disappear, so I can't. So it controls this, involuntary eye movements or what information that goes in. So this was how we utilized gaze contingency in our latest project. It's an acknowledgement of people who somehow passed by there. These are not collaborators, but people that are actually more actively involved in working with me. But I also collaborate with a lot of people who are peers that I did not list yet. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions, I'm happy to take them. I think, Kirill, you said 30 minutes talk and 15 minutes questions, so I'm on time.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Arzu. Brilliant talk. Yeah, very interesting studies, and it seems like you are doing really wide range of different research directions.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I didn't know that was very interesting result that you shown that with gaze contingent gaze contingent displays, you can actually like reduce the search space and like kind of eliminate the distractors, so people could be like more effective at certain tasks.
I mean, it is probably debatable, but it is the study that we had. I think we had 40 participants or so. That is where we see it quite clearly, but I think it needs replication before it becomes the truth. Yeah. It is, I mean, it is based on one experiment at the moment. We should do more of them, but there's an interesting, it's interesting. So it's not like 2 people. We had a pilot study with 16 people, and then we had another 40 people or so. So this is fairly strong for one experiment, but I don't know if you can consistently really reduce the search time by reducing the information in the periphery. I would like to see more studies because sometimes it's other conditions that come together in one experiment. But still, yeah.
Yeah, of course, perhaps it's task dependent and wouldn't be universal for every task.
Exactly.
But, yeah, got me thinking that maybe in some ways it's good, like for example, help people with ADHD to focus more. I don't know. So what kind of so we all familiar with foveated rendering. So like you also described the kind of one of the most already like standard use cases for the applying gaze contingent methods. Where do you see like where do you see like other applications for this, either in research or in real world environments?
You mean in general gaze contingent displays and where it might go?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's because of my own bias, I guess there's a clear level of detail management application area where you can, data streaming and big data is not going to go away, right? So we are producing more and more data. I think this data management or level of detail management, it is probably one application area. And if the virtual reality or extended reality is here to stay, now almost all of the VR headsets are coming with eye tracking integrated in them. And what else did I also see is the phones are now able to do stuff. So I think it may be a matter of time before we have eye tracking in all our devices. And if we have this, you can probably do like attention management, like you said, for example, ADHD, you can characterize people's visual behavior and maybe optimize assistance. So, for example, navigation assistance is an interesting area, but it could be any other software use. And if you provide assistance like the Clippy story without asking or understanding the user's own behavior or personalized behavior, then you might annoy them. But if you can, let's say, watch their eye movements for a while and see, where they are struggling, and customize the assistance for software use. That could be interesting. And I guess the other big area, which may be like, there's this this is a scientific area, that there's this concept called spatial neglect. And I think that there may be an interesting like a therapeutics intervention ideas that might come from gaze contingency. There's also some simulations of glaucoma-like diseases where, you can then explain people how a visual disability might affect people. So there's maybe room for teaching where, then I can put on my glasses, or not even glasses, but I can watch something and understand how someone with a visual deficiency sees the world. That would be gaze contingent. So there's, I think, quite a few, and these are what I'm speculating now on my feet. So if you do it systematically, I think there may be even more room for it. Studying peripheral vision, as I already said, also in the slides.